Ethan Cole never thought his life would change because of a single joke. He was only a guard, one soldier among many, posted at the great citadel on the moon. The halls were wide and shining, filled with banners of silver and gold, and every corner was watched by men in armor. Ethan had been ordered there only for a short duty during the peace celebration. Nothing more. Expected the night to pass quietly, but fate had other plans. The Queen was there. Queen Alara, ruler of Earth and its colonies, known across the stars for her wisdom and her beauty. Ethan had only seen her from afar during the ceremony, standing on the high balcony with her crown catching the light. He never imagined he would come close to her, let alone be alone in her chamber. The hall outside had been silent when another guard told him to deliver a message inside. Ethan obeyed, though his heart beat fast. When he entered, he found her standing by the tall window, the moonlight falling over her like a silver river. She wore no crown now, only a soft veil over her long, dark hair. Her blue eyes were fixed on the stars outside, but when she turned, they caught him like fire. Ethan froze. "Ow," he bowed, his voice shaking as he gave the short message from the council. She listened, nodded, and then smiled, just faintly. That smile was more dangerous than any weapon he had ever seen. He should have left. He knew he should not stay longer than needed, but something in her gaze held him there. She looked tired, though no one else would have noticed. He saw it in her eyes, in the way her shoulders bent under the heavy robe. "You are new," she said softly. "Yes, my queen," he answered, his throat dry. "What is your name?" "Ethan Cole." "Cole," she repeated, as if testing the sound. "Do you fear standing here before me?" He wanted to say no, but the truth slipped out. "Yes." Her smile grew wider, though it held no mockery. She walked closer, the moonlight moving across her face. Ethan felt his chest tighten. She was close enough now that he could see the lines of her lips, the shine of her eyes. "I fear many things too," she whispered. It was a strange thing, hearing such words from her. She was the queen, the most powerful woman alive. Yet in that moment she sounded human, almost fragile. Ethan's nerves twisted, and before he could stop himself, he tried to lighten the heavy air. "If you fear the night, my queen, you may always share my bed," he said with a crooked smile. He thought it was harmless, only a poor attempt at humor, the kind of joke men made to each other in the barracks. He expected her to frown or dismiss him. Instead, she studied him with a long, deep stare. Then, with slow and deliberate hands, she reached up and pulled the veil from her hair. It slipped down over her shoulders like water. She stepped closer until she stood before him, her face calm, her eyes steady. "Move over," she said. Ethan could not breathe. The words struck him harder than any blade. He thought he had misheard, but she stood firm, her gaze never leaving his. She had stripped away the veil, stripped away the image of untouchable power, and what remained was a woman standing before him. His heart pounded in his chest. Every part of him screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, forbidden. Yet another part of him could not look away. He was a guard, nothing more. She was the queen above all others. But in that room, with only the cold moonlight and her voice breaking the silence, the world felt different. He shifted, his legs weak, his hands uncertain. He tried to speak, but no sound came. The queen tilted her head, her lips almost smiling again. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole realized that fate did not wait for permission. It simply stepped forward, bold and unshaken, and demanded that he follow. And so began the night that would change everything. Ethan could not sleep that night. The words of the queen echoed in his mind. "Move over." He had thought she would laugh at his clumsy joke, but instead she had turned it into something real, something he could not forget. He sat in his small quarters, staring at the ceiling, his heart still restless. He was only a soldier, nothing more than a name on a long list. Yet she had looked at him as if he mattered. He tried to remind himself that he had no place near her, that he should keep his head down and stay silent. But the memory of her eyes, shining with both strength and weariness, pulled him back into a storm he could not escape. The next evening, he was again called to her chamber. He almost refused, but the order came directly from her attendants, and no guard could disobey. His steps were heavy as he walked through the long hall, past torches that flickered against tall walls. He felt the weight of every shadow watching him. When he entered, the queen was seated by the fire. Her crown was gone, her robe laid aside. She looked nothing like the untouchable ruler he had seen on the balcony. She looked like a woman seeking air after being drowned for too long. "You returned," she said, her voice calm. "I was ordered," my queen, Ethan answered. "Even so, you came." "What?" She gestured for him to sit. He hesitated, then lowered himself onto the chair across from her. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling fire. Then she spoke again. "You know what it means to carry a crown, Ethan Cole?" He shook his head. "No, my queen. It means being seen by all, but known by none. Every smile is measured, every word is weighed. I am never allowed to be weak, never allowed to be afraid, yet I am still human." Her words struck him. He had thought of her only as a figure above the world, beyond reach. But now she sounded closer, almost fragile. "You should not tell me this," he said carefully. "I am only a soldier. Perhaps that is why I tell you," she replied, "because you are not one of them. You do not sit in my council. You do not whisper for power. You look at me and I feel like a woman again, not a throne." Ethan's chest tightened. He should have stood, should have excused himself, but her voice pulled him closer. He found himself speaking without thought. "I do not see you as a throne. I see you as you are." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to fall from her shoulders. She leaned back, her gaze never leaving him. "Tell me about your life," she said. So he did. He told her about his childhood on the far colonies, about working the fields with his father, about joining the guard to earn bread and shelter. His words were simple, but she listened as if each one carried treasure. He spoke of stars seen from open skies, of laughter shared with soldiers around the fire. When he finished, she whispered, "You live freer than I ever have." They talked deep into the night. Each word made the distance between them smaller. Ethan saw not the Queen of Nations, but a woman who longed for freedom. Alara saw not a soldier, but a man unshaken by her crown. Still, danger lingered. Outside her chamber walls, the palace was alive with whispers. Nobles and advisors watched the queen closely, ready to strike if they sensed weakness. Ethan knew that if anyone discovered their meetings, he would be cast aside or worse, yet he could not bring himself to leave her. When the fire grew dim, she stood, should rest. She said, then she looked at him, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "Do you still fear me, Ethan?" He rose slowly, his hands trembling. "Yes," he admitted, "but not for the same reasons." She stepped closer, her hand brushing the veil that still lay on the chair, her eyes locked on his, unyielding. "Good fear keeps the world alive, but do not let it silence you." He bowed, then turned to leave, though every step felt heavy. When the door closed behind him, Ethan knew his life had already changed. What began as a careless joke was now a fire, and the fire would not die. The palace grew restless in the days that followed. Whispers moved through the halls like smoke, curling into every corner. Servants carried rumors, guards traded quiet glances, and the council sharpened their questions. Everyone felt that something was shifting around the queen, though none could name it. Ethan walked through those halls with unease pressing on his shoulders. He kept his head down, but he could not escape the watchful eyes of other guards. They looked at him longer than before, as if they sensed something hidden. He told himself that he was imagining it, but deep inside he knew the truth. His closeness to the queen was no longer invisible. One evening, as he made his way back to his post, a hand caught his arm. He turned to see Sir Alden, a senior knight of the palace, tall and grim. Alden's eyes narrowed as he spoke. "You spend much time near her chamber, Cole?" Alden said. "I follow orders," Ethan replied. "Orders do not bring a soldier into a queen's private hour," Alden said sharply. "You should be careful. The palace eats men alive who forget their place." Ethan did not answer, simply bowed and walked away, though his heart pounded with anger. Alden's warning was more than words. It was suspicion taking root, and suspicion in the court was poison. That night, Ethan was again summoned. When he entered the queen's chamber, she saw the tension on his face before he spoke a word. "What troubles you?" she asked. "Men are watching," he said quietly. "They whisper, they question. Soon they will do more." Alara's expression grew hard, though her voice remained steady. "They are always watching. Do not fear them." "But if they discover," Ethan began, but she lifted her hand, silencing him. "Let them discover nothing," she said. "I am queen. They will not dare, unless I allow it." He wanted to believe her, but he knew the danger ran deeper than her words. Nobles sought power, knights sought honor, and enemies waited in the dark. One slip, and both of them could fall. Before he could speak again, the sound of hurried steps came from the hall. The door opened without warning, and a young guard stumbled in, pale and breathless. "My queen," the guard gasped. "There has been an attempt. Blades in the lower court. They were meant for you." Ethan moved before he thought. His hand went to his sword, his body placing itself between Alara and the door. The queen rose tall, her eyes flashing like steel. "Who sent them?" she asked. "We do not yet know," the guard stammered. "But they were dressed as servants. They slipped past the gates." "Show me," Ethan said. The queen looked at him, and in that moment he saw something clear in her gaze. Trust. She nodded once, then allowed him to lead. The lower court was chaos. Guards had already captured 2 men, their blades stained. Blood marked the stones, proof of how close the attack had come. The prisoners spat curses, refusing to speak, but their silence spoke louder than words. This was no random strike. It was planned, and it came from within the palace. Ethan stood over them, his sword ready, but his mind was sharper than his blade. He knew this was not just an attempt on the queen's life, it was a warning. Someone in the court wanted her afraid, weakened, distracted. The queen stepped forward, her voice cutting through the air. "Take them to the dungeons. Find their tongues and their masters. I will not bow to shadows."
Oh!
Ethan watched her, struck again by the strength in her presence. Yet he also saw the flicker in her eyes, the brief shadow of fear she would never show to others. Later, when they were alone, he spoke softly. "You could have been killed." "So could you," she answered. "I swore no oath to protect you beyond my duty," he said. "You did more than duty tonight," she replied, her voice low. "You stood before me without hesitation. That is worth more than all the crowns in this palace." Ethan felt his chest tighten. He should not have been there, should not have heard her say those words, but the truth was undeniable. They were bound now, not by chance, but by fire. Outside, the palace still whispered. Inside, the queen and her soldiers stood closer than ever, caught between fear and defiance. Both knew the path ahead was dangerous, but neither was willing to turn back. And so, the shadows of betrayal grew deeper, even as their bond grew stronger. The days after the attack were filled with tension. The palace was locked down, guards doubled at every gate, and whispers carried sharper edges than before. Yet in the council chamber, the nobles spoke not of the traitors or the knives in the dark, but of marriage. Queen Alara sat on her high seat, her crown heavy, her face calm. Around her, the council argued. The Duke of Haran demanded that she accept a union with his house. Another lord pushed for an alliance with the outer colonies through a wedding bond. Spoke of peace, of strength, of duty, but Alara knew their true desire. They wanted control, and a husband chosen by them would place chains on her throne. Ethan stood at his post near the great door, silent but alert. He heard every word, every false promise. His hand itched on the hilt of his sword as he watched the nobles circle like wolves. At last, one counselor stepped forward and bowed. "My queen," he said, "the people grow restless. A queen without a king appears weak. If you will not choose, others will." The chamber fell silent. Lara's eyes swept over them, cold and sharp. "You speak of weakness, yet it was not weakness that stopped the blades in my court. It was loyalty. Remember that." Her words struck like iron, and the council fell quiet. But Ethan could see it in their faces. They would not stop. They would return with sharper tongues and deeper plots. That night, Alara called for Ethan. In her private chamber, the crown was gone, and the firelight softened her features. Yet her eyes still carried the weight of the day. They would have me marry a man who seeks power, not peace, she said bitterly. They would trade my heart as if it were gold. You do not have to obey them, Ethan said. They believe I do, she replied. And if I refuse, they will stir rebellion. Already, I hear whispers in the colonies. Marriage would bind them, or so they claim. Ethan felt jealousy stir in his chest, though he tried to bury it. The thought of her standing beside another man, bound not by choice but by force, burned like fire. Yet he knew his own place. He was no duke, no lord, no noble with a kingdom in his hand. He was a soldier, nothing more. They will never let me choose freely, she said, her voice lower now. Every step I take, they tighten their grip. Even tonight, I feel the walls closing in. Ethan wanted to tell her what he felt, but the words stayed trapped in his throat. He feared they would bring ruin to both of them. Instead, he said, "Then you must break the walls before they break you." Her eyes lifted to his, and for a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then she spoke. "Would you stand with me, Ethan Cole, if I did?" He did not hesitate. Yes. The next day, the Queen summoned her council again. But this time, she did not come alone. Ethan walked at her side, his presence bold, his hand resting on his sword. Murmurs rippled through the hall as the nobles exchanged uneasy looks. Alara raised her voice. "You speak of marriage as if it were the only path to peace. Yet I have uncovered your lies. The union with the Duke of Heron is no alliance. It is a trap, forged with bribes and secret promises. I will not bend to it. I will not be bound by false chains." Gasps filled the chamber. Faces turned pale. "You have betrayed the throne," she continued, her voice steady, "and I will see every traitor cast into the dark." The guards moved at her signal, seizing 2 counselors who cried out in protest. Their betrayal was no longer rumor. Documents had been found, proof of their plot. The chamber erupted with shouts, but Alara stood tall, her words cut through the noise. "I will rule not by fear, but by truth. Those who remain will serve with loyalty, or they will fall beside the traitors." When the council was dismissed, Ethan followed her back to her chamber. For the first time, she let the strength fade from her face. She leaned against the window, her eyes weary. "You risked everything today," Ethan said quietly. "So did you," she replied. "But together, we won." Outside, the palace trembled with unrest, and war clouds gathered on the horizon. In that moment, within the chamber walls, a bond stronger than crowns was forming. A bond that neither council nor traitor could break. The days after the council's betrayal were heavy with fear. Traitors had been removed, but their allies spread unrest through the colonies. Messages carried warnings of fleets preparing for war. The Queen's court was divided, and many doubted her strength to hold the throne. Ethan saw it in every corridor. Guards whispered about battles to come. Servants moved quickly with their eyes low. Even the nobles who had sworn loyalty looked uneasy, waiting for a chance to shift with the wind. But the Queen did not bend. She stood before her people, her voice steady, her crown shining under the high light of the chamber. "We will not fall," she declared. "We will not bow. This throne stands for truth, not fear." Her words gave strength, but it was Ethan's presence that gave hope. He trained soldiers day and night, drilling them until their arms shook and their breaths came ragged. He stood among them, not above them, earning their respect with sweat and steel. In the barracks they whispered his name, not as a guard but as a leader. When the call to war finally came, the palace was ready. The enemy fleet descended near the outer colonies, and battles raged in the skies. From the windows of the citadel, the night was lit with fire and smoke, streaks of light cutting across the stars. The Queen commanded from the throne room, her orders clear, her spirit unbroken. Ethan rode with the soldiers, leading them through fire and blood. The ground he fought with a strength that surprised even himself. Blades clashed, shields shattered, and cries of men echoed across the stone courts. Ethan's voice rose above the chaos, guiding his men, holding the line. Where he stood, the enemy could not pass. Hours stretched like years. When the dust began to settle, the palace still stood. The traitors' banners burned, their armies broken. The Queen's forces, though wounded and weary, had not been defeated. When Ethan returned to the citadel, his armor scarred and his face marked with blood, the Queen was waiting. She stood at the top of the stair, her crown gone, her robe cast aside. When she saw him alive, her eyes filled with something stronger than relief. "You came back," she whispered. "I said I would stand with you," he answered, his voice rough with exhaustion. She stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. For the first time, she let the world fade. No council, no crown, no soldiers watching from the shadows. It's only a woman and a man, bound by more than chance. That night, in the quiet of her chamber, she stripped away the last weight of the throne. She laid aside her crown, her jewels, and her veil. She looked at him not as a queen, but as a woman who had once said, "Move over." And for the first time, Ethan did not feel unworthy. He felt chosen. They lay side by side, the firelight soft around them. He could hear her breathing steady and calm, and he knew that no crown could ever matter more than this. She had found freedom not in power, but in trust. And he had found purpose, not in duty, but in love. Outside, the palace still buzzed with worry. New battles would come, new enemies would rise, but the story of the queen and her soldier would not fade. It would pass through the halls like fire, told in whispers and songs, remembered not for fear but for courage. Years later, people would speak of the queen who defied her counsel, who chose her own path, who loved not for gain but for truth. They would speak of the soldier who stood beside her when the world threatened to break. And together, their names would live as legend. For Ethan Cole and Queen Alara, the night that began with a careless joke had become the night that changed history. A throne was defended, a crown kept strong, but above all, two hearts had found each other in a world of shadows and fire. And that was the story no war could ever erase.